In the hush of a medieval dawn, as mist curled like restless spirits above thatched rooftops, a sound broke through the stillness. A sound so ordinary it was ignored, yet so fateful it would ripple into eternity. The cry of a rooster. Its voice was the heartbeat of every village, the timekeeper of farmers, the herald of waking life. But on this day, in some forgotten corner of Europe, the rooster did not simply crow. It laid an egg. Imagine the silence that followed. A farmer stoops, unbelieving. Neighbors gather, muttering, crossing themselves in trembling haste. The thing was small, fragile, oval, and unremarkable to the modern eye. But in that moment, it was no egg at all. It was an omen. To the medieval mind, it was not the miracle of birth, but the whisper of damnation. And in this fragile shell, the villagers saw the outline of the Antichrist. How could such a simple act, so ordinary in hens, so natural in the cycles of life, unravel the certainty of a community? To us, it is biology. To them, it was the breaking of cosmic order. The rooster was not meant to give birth. Roosters, in their eyes, belonged to the order of masculinity, strength, virility, guardians of the dawn. An egg from such a creature was not a gift, but a betrayal, a rupture in the carefully woven tapestry of God's design. And what breaks divine order, they believed, must belong to the devil. Stories spread like wildfire through narrow streets and candlelit halls. It is cursed, someone whispered. It will hatch a serpent. Another voice trembled. No, a basilisk, the king of snakes, whose breath kills, whose gaze petrifies. But beneath all these mutterings grew a darker, more terrible fear, that within this egg lay not a beast of scales, but a beast of prophecy. That this shell might split and reveal the very child of Revelation, the Antichrist, born not from womb, but from abomination. And so, a rooster was seized, bound, and brought before the eyes of priests and judges. Not as food, not as livestock, but as a criminal. Its crime, laying an egg. Its sentence, death. What does it tell us? That an entire society could tremble before such a fragile thing. That they could stare at an egg and see not breakfast, but apocalypse? It is here, in the fragile shattering of reason, that we glimpse the strange heartbeat of the Middle Ages. A time when the veil between natural and supernatural was thin, when the everyday world bled seamlessly into the cosmic, when every flicker of light or tremor of the earth could be read as the handwriting of God or the claw marks of Satan. Consider for a moment the terror of signs. A comet crossing the night sky was not a celestial stone, but a sword flaming in heaven, heralding wars. A child born with two heads was not a biological mutation, but an omen of kingdoms divided. A solar eclipse was not the moon's shadow, but God dimming his lamp, warning his people. And so too, the rooster's egg was no accident of nature. It was a doorway, a crack in the wall that separated this fragile world from the abyss. But why the Antichrist? Why did their terror not stop at serpents or monsters, but stretch into the realm of Revelation? Because medieval Europe lived in the shadow of apocalypse. The book of Revelation was not for them a distant allegory. It was a map of the present, a countdown, a cosmic hourglass forever near its end. Every plague, every famine, every war was not just history, but prophecy unfolding before their eyes. They lived not in time, but in the constant imminence of the end of time. And when you live at the edge of eternity, every unnatural crack in the order of things is a trumpet, a warning, a sign that the beast is near. Picture the scene. The rooster, feathers dulled by dirt and fear, bound by twine, placed in the center of a crowded square. Around it, priests intoning prayers, villagers clutching rosaries, magistrates whispering of sin and punishment. And in their gaze lies something more than fear. It is desperation. To kill the rooster, to burn the egg, was not cruelty, it was salvation. If the Antichrist could be stopped before he hatched, perhaps the world could be spared. What does it mean, then, that humanity looked at an innocent bird and saw the end of the world? Is this not, in truth, the eternal habit of humankind, to project our deepest fears onto the fragile, the innocent, the voiceless? We still do it today. We invent scapegoats, weaving our anxieties into them, and then we destroy them in rituals of false safety. The rooster's trial is not just a medieval absurdity, it is a mirror held up to our own time. The egg, white and silent, sits like a riddle. What is contained within? Potential, life, death, salvation, doom. The egg has always been cosmic. From the myths of the Orphic egg in Greek lore, to the Hindu cosmic egg from which Brahma was born, to the finished tales of a world hatched from the fragments of an egg split across the waters. The egg has always stood at the boundary of beginnings. But here, in this medieval village, it stood not for creation but for corruption. It was not the egg of the cosmos, but the egg of chaos. And so it had to be destroyed. The fire was lit. The rooster, helpless, was cast into the flames with its cursed egg. Smoke coiled upward, mingling with incense and whispered prayers. Ash scattered, rising like the ghosts of unspoken doubts. And as the villagers watched, perhaps a thought pressed faintly on the edge of their minds. Had they saved themselves, or had they betrayed the innocence of creation itself? The story of this rooster is more than a curiosity of history. It is the embodiment of a paradox, that humans, who long for order, will turn upon life itself when life does not conform to their rules. That our terror of the unknown can transfigure the most natural of things into an enemy. The rooster was not condemned because it was evil. It was condemned because it broke the script of reality. And so, the opening act of our tale is not of feathers or flames, but of fear. Fear that turned a bird into a demon. Fear that transformed an egg into a prophecy. Fear that made the ordinary unbearable. This is the story we will follow. How one rooster, one egg, and one trial reveal the fragile, trembling heart of an age where the line between salvation and damnation was as thin as a shell. Because in the end, the true subject of this story is not the rooster. It is us. It is the human mind, forever haunted by omens, forever desperate for meaning, forever willing to burn what it cannot understand. And as the smoke fades, the question lingers like a shadow. Was the Antichrist truly destroyed in the flames, or does he still wait, silent, inside the unbroken eggs of our own fears? They lived in a world where silence never truly existed. Every sound, every sight, every accident in nature carried with it a hidden message. To the medieval imagination, the cosmos was not empty but overflowing with meaning. The crackle of fire, the rustle of wind, the sudden shadow of an eclipse, all were signs written into the fabric of existence. Nothing simply happened. Everything happened for a reason, and that reason was always vast, dangerous, divine, or demonic. In such a world, the rooster's egg could never be seen as a quirk of biology. It was a message. For us, the thought may invite a smile. We imagine peasants trembling before a shell, priests thundering sermons about a chicken. Yet to laugh is to misunderstand. In their world, the smallest disruption echoed through the whole cosmos. If nature faltered in its design, if the categories of male and female, order and chaos, day and night blurred, it meant the great battle between God and Satan was already spilling into the world. And what could be more unholy than life emerging where it was never meant to be? Why such fear? Because their age was soaked in apocalypse. The book of Revelation was not sealed to them. It was a living script. Each famine was a horseman riding through their fields. Each plague was a trumpet-sounding judgment. Each war was another seal broken. They lived not in the comfort of continuity, but in the expectation that history was running out of pages. The end of days was not someday, it was soon. They scanned the horizon not for progress, but for signs. And so, when a rooster laid an egg, it was not an accident. It was a signal. Their chronicles show us this world of signs. When Halley's Comet blazed in 1066, the Bayeux Tapestry recorded men pointing upward, their faces twisted in dread, believing the heavens themselves had declared the fall of kings. When children were born with deformities, 2 heads, twisted spines, limbs fused or missing, their births were paraded as sermons, warnings that sin had infected even the womb. When the sky darkened in eclipse, the world shuddered in silence, convinced God had hidden his face. To them, the rooster's egg was simply another entry in a long ledger of cosmic omens. And so the villagers did what they always did when confronted with the unbearable. They acted. Fear demands ritual, and ritual demands sacrifice. The rooster was seized, carried into the presence of priests and judges, its feathers dulled, its body trembling. Bound not merely by cords of twine, but by the weight of dread, it became a criminal. Its crime was existence, its guilt assumed. Testimonies were not needed. The evidence lay in the egg itself. In the crowded square, villagers clutched rosaries, priests muttered prayers, magistrates prepared judgment. The verdict was inevitable. To leave the egg unburned was to risk apocalypse. To kill the bird and shatter its shell was to restore the fabric of reality. The flames rose high, crackling with both relief and desperation. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with incense and whispered prayers. For the villagers, this was not murder, it was salvation. If the Antichrist had indeed been waiting within the shell, his birth had been smothered in ash. The world, they believed, was safe once more. Yet even as relief spread, doubt lingered in the shadows. Could they truly be certain? Had they destroyed the danger, or only silenced a mystery they could not comprehend? It is easy for us to dismiss this as primitive superstition, yet is our world so different? We no longer search the skies for omens, but we stare at screens, reading graphs, maps, and headlines as though they, too, were prophecies. A stock market crash becomes a comet, streaking toward catastrophe. A virus mutating becomes a monstrous birth, a sermon of biology that foretells the future. A storm ravages coastlines and becomes not weather but revelation, a sign of a planet unraveling. We may not whisper of demons, but we speak of collapse. We may not burn roosters, but we sacrifice sleep, time, even trust, in rituals of fear. The rooster's egg, then, is not absurd. It is familiar. It is the mirror of our own impulses. For what it reveals is not the foolishness of medieval villagers, but the necessity of the human mind to weave story from chaos. We cannot accept accidents. We cannot leave the world mute. When randomness intrudes, we invent reasons, even if those reasons demand fire. The rooster was not condemned because it was evil. It was condemned because it broke the script, because its existence opened a crack in the order of things. Consider the way medieval people listened to storms. Thunder was not merely the collision of clouds. It was the voice of an angry heaven. A drought was not an accident of weather, but punishment. Crops withered not because of poor soil, but because sin had poisoned the land. To modernize these seem like projections, but to them it was coherence. Without such meanings the world was unbearable. They required a cosmos in which everything fit, even if fitting meant fear. This need to frame chaos is deeply human. Even today, when satellites circle the Earth and machines map the genome, we still cannot shake the hunger for patterns. We speak of markets correcting themselves, of nature taking revenge, of history teaching lessons. These are not scientific phrases, but echoes of that same medieval impulse. We grant the world personality, intention, voice. We prefer to live in a haunted universe than in a silent one, for silence is unbearable. The rooster's egg was a rupture in that fabric. It suggested that the categories which defined life, male and female, fertility and barrenness, natural and unnatural, could be overturned. And if they could be overturned, what was safe? If the boundaries of creation itself could blur, then perhaps the last boundary, between world and apocalypse, was already cracking. The egg was not small. It was everything. And so, it had to be destroyed. Imagine the scene again. The crowd gathering in the chill air, the whispers rippling through, the priests lifting their hands to the sky, the magistrates reading judgment. And at the center, a bewildered creature, guilty of nothing except embodying the terror of its time. The fire built beneath it was more than wood and flame. It was a barricade against dread. As the egg cracked and burned, the villagers believed they were closing the very mouth of hell. Yet what did they truly destroy? The Antichrist? Or their own chance to confront the strangeness of existence? Fear always urges us to destroy what we cannot understand. The rooster's egg was one such casualty. History is littered with others. This story, then, is not about a bird. It is about the architecture of human fear. It is about how people, when faced with uncertainty, turn accidents into symbols and symbols into threats. It is about how fragile we are in the face of mystery and how violent we can become when trying to silence it. The rooster's trial belongs to a category of forgotten rituals, moments when entire communities stood together not against an enemy they could see, but against shadows cast by their own imagination. We may smile, but in truth we do the same. We search endlessly for scapegoats, for containers into which we can pour our dread. In every age, some fragile figure is made to carry the burden of our fear. Perhaps this is why the story continues to resonate. Not because of its strangeness, but because of its familiarity. It is the story of us, repeated in different costumes, on different stages. The rooster becomes a mirror in which we see our own restless need to assign blame, our own desperation to cage chaos, our own rituals of fire. And when the villagers went home that night, soot on their clothes, smoke still clinging to their hair, perhaps some lay awake, wondering what they had really witnessed. Had they slain evil, Or had they destroyed an innocent creature in the name of a fear they could not name? That unease is eternal, stretching forward into our own sleepless nights, when we too wonder whether the enemies we fight are real or imagined, and whether our sacrifices bring safety or only silence. The rooster was not alone in its fate. Across medieval Europe, animals were not merely creatures of field and barn. They could become criminals, witnesses, and even martyrs in trials that blurred the line between man and beast, nature and law, innocence and sin. To modern minds it is absurd. A pig standing in chains, a goat facing judgment, swarms of insects called to court. Yet these events were real, chronicled in documents and sermons, carried out with solemnity. And in their seriousness, we glimpse the heartbeat of an age both strange and uncomfortably familiar. The rooster's egg might seem like an anomaly, but it belonged to this larger theater of cosmic justice. In 1386, in the French town of Falaise, a sow was accused of killing a child. The pig was dressed in human clothing, placed on trial before judges, and condemned to death by hanging. The execution was carried out in the town square, and the chronicles record that crowds gathered as if for a human criminal. The purpose was not merely punishment but demonstration, to show that sin, even in beasts, would be purged by the law. There are records of rats summoned to court for stealing grain. Lawyers appointed to defend them argued, in mock serious tones, that their clients had not received fair summons, since cats prowled the roads and prevented their attendance. Locusts, caterpillars, and beetles were excommunicated from fields, as if their swarming destruction was not instinct but rebellion against divine law. Even insects, blind to human decrees, were thought subject to the authority of church and court. Why such trials? Because the medieval mind saw the universe as seamless. Law was not a human invention, but a reflection of divine justice that extended across all creation. To punish an animal was not to mistake it for a person, but to uphold the cosmic balance. If the world was a body, then sin in any part of it required cleansing. The pig that killed a child, the rats that consumed grain, the rooster that laid an egg, each was a symptom of a deeper disorder. Trials were rituals of restoration. Public performances meant to reassure a trembling people that the walls of order still held. Consider the solemnity with which these trials were conducted. They were not jokes, not carnivals, but proceedings as serious as any human case. Judges wore robes. Clerks recorded testimony. Punishments were carried out with ritual precision. The law did not laugh. It thundered. For the people who gathered, these trials reassured them that justice was cosmic, that order still held, that nothing escaped the gaze of God. To try a beast was to declare that no force, however small, would be allowed to breach the fragile wall between order and chaos. One chronicler tells of goats accused of witchcraft, their eyes said to glow in the night, their steps traced in circles upon the earth. Inquisitors claimed such animals carried the devil's mark, that their bodies were vessels for spirits. They were slaughtered not for hunger but for purity, as though their deaths could cauterize the land itself. Another record speaks of dogs paraded in chains for biting masters, as though the act was rebellion against hierarchy itself. To strike back at a human was to strike at the ladder of creation, and for that crime, they too were punished. These stories remind us that the line between the sacred and the absurd is thinner than we imagine. The medieval villager lived in a cosmos alive with tension, where every action carried eternal weight. A rooster's egg was no triviality, it was the crack of doom. And so too, each animal placed on trial became part of the same script. Creation policed, chaos restrained, meaning enforced through fire and rope. Philosophically, what does it reveal? That humans cannot endure a world without boundaries. We require categories, human and animal, order and disorder, permitted and forbidden. When those categories tremble, we create rituals to strengthen them. The rooster was condemned because it confused the categories. A pig was hanged because it blurred the line between predator and protector. Rats were cursed because they mocked ownership, crossing fields without respect for human law. Insects were excommunicated because they disrespected human toil, feeding upon harvests without permission. Each act was a wound in the fabric of meaning, and each trial was a bandage laid across the wound. The theater of animal trials was, in truth, the theater of human fear. It was the projection of anxiety onto creatures too weak to resist, too innocent to defend themselves. Yet in condemning them, people believed they restored stability. The world was cleansed. The abyss was pushed back. But pause and ask, is this instinct gone? When a plane crashes, when markets collapse, when tragedy strikes, how quickly do we demand blame, even when chance is the truer culprit? We crave culprits the way medieval people craved omens. We require judgment to feel safe. Without it, the silence of chaos is unbearable. Imagine the villagers leaving such trials. Children whispered of demons slain, mothers clutched their rosaries tighter, men nodded with satisfaction that justice had prevailed. But in the quiet of night, perhaps unease lingered. Could rope and fire truly silence chaos? Could justice aimed at beasts truly cleanse the fears in human hearts? The ashes of animals scattered, but the dread remained, waiting for the next sign, the next omen, the next trial. It is here that the rooster's egg becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes a symbol of the human compulsion to punish what does not fit. For every society builds its rituals of exclusion. The Middle Ages clothed pigs and hanged them. We hold public spectacles of condemnation in other forms. The stage has changed, but the script is the same. Fear rises, an anomaly appears. It is dressed as guilty, destroyed, and we breathe relief as though the world is repaired. Yet the repair never lasts. Fear always finds new vessels. Perhaps this is why these stories endure in chronicles. Not because they are strange, but because they are us. They are mirrors of the same instinct alive in every age. The rooster's trial may sound absurd, but absurdity is simply fear wrapped in ritual. To laugh at it is to laugh at our own reflection. So when the flames consumed the rooster and its egg, they consumed more than feathers and shell. They consumed a symbol too dangerous to be allowed to live. And when the people turned away from the ashes, they carried with them the same uneasy truth we carry now. That fear cannot be burned. It survives every ritual, every judgment, every sacrifice. And it waits, always, for the next anomaly, the next egg, the next scapegoat upon which we will lay the unbearable weight of chaos. The rooster was carried into the chamber not as an animal, but as a prisoner. The sound of its wings, muffled against the cloth that bound them, echoed strangely against the stone walls. Its eyes, bright and uncomprehending, darted in every direction as if seeking an exit it could never find. To those who gathered, this was no ordinary bird. It was the vessel of inversion, the sign of corruption, the accused in a trial that was meant to restore order to a shaken world. Chains clinked against wood, and the courtroom was not built for such a trial, yet it became the theater of the absurd sanctified by terror. Long wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of villagers who pressed in to witness what they believed to be the judgment of heaven itself. At the front sat the judges, their robes heavy, their faces drawn tight with solemnity. Beside them, the clergy in scarlet and black, their hands resting upon scripture, their eyes sharp as though they could pierce through the egg itself and glimpse the monster. Witnesses were called. A farmer swore he had seen the rooster crouched strangely the night before, as though brooding. Another insisted he had heard unnatural sounds from the barn, a cry not of bird nor beast, but something in between. A woman declared she had felt a tremor in the ground as the egg was discovered, proof that the earth itself recoiled from the blasphemy. Each testimony wove itself into the tapestry of accusation, and none dared to laugh at the absurdity. For to laugh was to deny the danger. The rooster itself could not defend. Its crowing was taken as mockery, its silence as guilt, its very existence as evidence. The egg, cradled in cloth upon a table like an unholy relic, sat between the judges as the centerpiece of all argument. One priest declared it the seed of a basilisk, destined to hatch a serpent crowned with feathers and armed with venom. Another thundered that it was nothing less than the vessel of the Antichrist, that to allow it to remain was to risk the fall of Christendom itself. Scripture was invoked with ferocity. From Genesis came the laws of creation. Male and female he created them. From Leviticus came the warnings against corruption, against beasts unclean. From Revelation came the specter of beasts rising from the abyss. Each word was twisted into judgment, each passage sharpened into a weapon. The rooster's egg became not merely a thing of straw and shell. It became the proof of prophecy, the embodiment of inversion, the crack through which hell itself threatened to pour. Outside, the villagers pressed against the doors, straining to hear the words. They whispered prayers, but also rumors. Some said they had seen strange lights in the sky since the egg was laid. Others claimed that cows gave no milk and hens no eggs in the days that followed. The story grew larger than the court itself. By the time the trial reached its height, The rooster's egg had become the explanation for every misfortune, the scapegoat for every dread. And so the trial was not only a judgment of a ruse. Yet beneath the spectacle lay philosophy. What does it mean to try an animal? To ascribe guilt to a creature that knows nothing of law? It is easy to laugh centuries later, but in that chamber, in that moment, the laughter froze in the throats of all who entered. For this was not truly about the rooster. It was about humanity's refusal to let contradiction stand. To punish the rooster was to punish chaos itself. To condemn the egg was to seal the breach that had opened in the order of creation. The tria, the judges conferred. Their voices rose and fell like waves breaking against stone. Some hesitated, whispering that perhaps the egg was mere mistake, a curiosity without consequence. But others struck down the thought quickly. To doubt the danger was to risk inviting it. Better to burn 100 innocent animals than to let one vessel of the Antichrist survive. Better to err on the side of fire than on the side of damnation. And so, slowly, the weight of consensus pressed downward. The rooster would be gone. As verdict loomed, the rooster crowed once more, its voice carrying through the chamber like a final declaration. Some said it was mocking, others swore it was defiant, and a few believed it was pleading. Whatever it was, the sound silenced the room. For in that cry, they heard the tension of the trial itself, the clash between innocence and terror, between absurdity and necessity, between reason and ritual. And then, the gavel fell. The judgment was declared. The rooster would die, and the egg would be D. It is here that the trial revealed its deepest meaning. For it was not enough to kill the animal or crush the egg. It had to be done with ceremony, with spectacle, with the weight of law and scripture. It was not only about destroying the anomaly. It was about showing the people that the anomaly could not be tolerated. That order would be defended at any cost. That fear itself would be harnessed, transformed into obedience. The trial was theater, but it was also theology. It was ritual made flesh. The rue. In this moment, the rooster became more than a bird. It became a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting our endless hunger to impose meaning, our endless dread of disorder, our endless willingness to destroy what does not fit. The egg sat silent as ever, yet it spoke volumes. And in the silence, the people projected their own terrors, their own prophecies, their own visions of apocalypse. The rooster and its egg were no longer alone on trial. Human imagination itself stood accused, guilty of terror. And so segment 4 ends with a verdict, a sentence heavy with symbolism. The rooster would be condemned, the egg destroyed. Yet what truly perished that day was not merely feathers and shell. It was the fragile boundary between the real and the imagined, between the absurd and the sacred. For once fear is given form, once prophecy is given flesh, there is no going back. The rooster's trial was absurd, yes, but it was also a confession that mankind cannot live with mystery. The verdict had been spoken, yet still the chamber stirred with unease. In the Middle Ages, sentencing was never the end of judgment. It was only the beginning of meaning. For what mattered most was not the punishment, but the interpretation, and the rooster's egg resisted every attempt at explanation. It sat in silence, pale and unbroken, yet so heavy with dread that men trembled to look upon it for too long. Its existence demanded answers, and so the court became less a tribunal of law than a cathedral of. One priest rose with fiery certainty, his voice rolling across the chamber as though carried by divine thunder. "This egg is the devil's counterfeit," he proclaimed, slamming his palm upon scripture. "For God ordered creation male and female, each kind bringing forth fruit after its own seed. If a rooster lays an egg, it is no work of nature but the devil's parody. This egg is the handwriting of Satan across the page of creation." His words struck the crowd like hammers. Many crossed themselves, others s. But another voice rose in challenge, softer but no less firm. "Perhaps it is not Satan's mockery," this priest said, "but God's test. Have we not read of Job, who was broken to prove his faith? Have we not heard of Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice his son? Might not the Lord permit such an abomination to appear, not as a victory of hell, but as a trial for his people? We are called to trust the order of creation even when our eyes behold chaos. Perhaps the rooster's egg is no seed of the Antichrist. B. The murmurs deepened. Some nodded, comforted by the thought that the egg might be trial rather than terror. Yet others recoiled, uneasy at the implication that God himself might permit such confusion. For if the Creator allowed such inversion, Then was he not mocking his own handiwork? The question trembled in the air like a candle's flame, fragile, dangerous. No one dared say it aloud. Instead, a third voice, quieter, hesitant, asked a forbidden thought. What if it is neither God nor devil, but nature it? At once, the chamber stiffened. To suggest that nature might exceed the church's categories was perilous. To speak of mysteries beyond Scripture was to wander too near the borders of heresy. Yet the question hung unspoken in many minds. For if the rooster's egg was merely a curiosity of nature, then perhaps the world was wider and stranger than they had been taught. But wide and strange was frightening. Wide and strange was uncontainable. Far easier, far safer, to declare it evil and destroy it. Better to. And so theology clashed not only with itself, but with folklore. Monks spoke of the basilisk, king of serpents, said to hatch from a rooster's egg kept warm beneath a toad. Its glance alone could kill, its breath wither fields, its shadow poison rivers. Others spoke of the cockatrice, part bird, part serpent, a creature so infused with hell's venom that saints themselves trembled at its mention. These were not dismissed as superstition, they were cited as evidence. For to the medieval imagination, mython, the egg lay at the center of these storms of thought, mute, refusing to yield meaning. And it was precisely this refusal that fed the terror. For silence is the most powerful of omens. The shell revealed nothing, so men imagined everything. They saw molten fire where only yolk lay. They pictured claws pressing against the inside, eyes already open, unblinking, watching. They felt in its fragile shape the weight of eternity. The rooster crowed from its cage, and they swore the sound mocked them. Man project. Outside, the villagers wrestled with their own explanations. Some whispered of witchcraft, of spells cast in secret that had twisted the rooster against its nature. Witches, after all, were easier to hate than mysteries. If blame could be placed on a woman in the shadows, on an enemy at the edge of the village, then fire and rope could resolve the fear. Far better to believe the devil worked through human accomplices than to admit that nature itself had slipped its leash. For if witches could be burned, oh. In this way, theology did more than explain. It protected. It gave names to the nameless, boundaries to the boundless. It offered meaning, even if that meaning was terror. Better the certainty of dread than the abyss of uncertainty. Better to say this is Satan's work than to admit we do not know what this is. For in ignorance lay chaos, and chaos was intolerable. The rooster's egg had to be dressed in language, clothed in scripture, given a place in the cosmic order. Even if that place was the pit of. The debate stretched on, spiraling into repetition. And each repetition only deepened the impression that the egg was no longer an egg, but an oracle. The rooster, bright-eyed and silent, bore the burden of a world's fear. Every glance at its comb, every sound of its crow, seemed tinged with judgment. The bird had become a symbol, not of dawn, but of dusk. Its very existence spoke of betrayal, of order inverted. And so the people hardened their hearts. To doubt the danger was to invite it. To question the consensus settled at last, though not without scars. The egg was declared infernal, whether by devil's hand, witch's spell, or nature's corruption. Its silence was too dangerous, its questions too sharp. It must be destroyed, not only to protect the body, but to protect the mind. For as long as it existed, it whispered that the world might not be what they thought it was. Burn the egg, and burn the doubt. Crush the shell, and crush the terror. Silence it, and silence the abyss. Theology declared, in the sea. But what truly was destroyed that day? Not merely a fragile shell, but the possibility of wonder. Not merely a rooster's anomaly, but the fragile admission that mystery might exist without explanation. For the rooster's egg was guilty of only one thing, existing outside the categories men had built to comfort themselves. Yet that was crime enough. That was heresy enough. And so they clothed it in accusation, crowned it with prophecy, condemned it with law. The rooster's egg had become too heavy for their W. And here, centuries later, the mirror still waits. For do we not still destroy what unsettles us rather than live with it? Do we not still burn the books, silence the voices, exile the anomalies that make us question the solidity of our world? Do we not still crush the eggs we cannot name? The rooster's egg has not vanished. It has only changed form. It hides in our fears, in our judgments, in our need for certainty. It whispers still that the categories we cling to are fragile shells, and that any day. So segment 5 closes not with resolution, but with revelation, that the rooster's egg was never just about prophecy, nor superstition, nor law. It was about the human need to anchor chaos, to nail mystery to a cross of meaning. And when meaning falters, when certainty collapses, we reach for fire. Always fire. For in flames, at least, questions seem to vanish. But the truth is this: the questions never die. The sentence had been spoken, and with it the weight of centuries bore down upon a creature that could not understand its crime. The rooster, chained and trembling, was led from the courtroom into the cold air of the square. The egg, fragile yet terrible, was carried with reverence as though it were both relic and curse. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence so deep it seemed to press against the stones of the buildings themselves. For this was no ordinary execution. This was theater in which the world's O. A pyre had been built in the center of the square, its branches stacked high, its kindling dry and ready to leap into flame. Fire was chosen not merely for its power to kill, but for its power to cleanse. In the medieval mind, fire was both destruction and sanctification, the only element fierce enough to banish the devil and seal the breach he had torn in the order of things. If the egg carried the seed of the Antichrist, if the rooster bore the mark of inversion, then only fire could ensure that no whis. The rooster crowed once, a sound thin and ragged, more dirge than dawn. Some in the crowd shivered, swearing it sounded like laughter, others like weeping. It was bound to the stake, feathers ruffling in the cold wind, its bright eyes unblinking as though staring into eternity. The egg was placed at its feet, resting upon a bed of straw that would soon ignite. Priest and judge together raised their voices, intoning prayers of exorcism, calling upon God to witness, to cleanse, to restore the balance of cray. Children pressed against their mothers' skirts, peering through gaps in fingers that shielded their eyes. Old men clutched rosaries, whispering under their breath. Women muttered prayers, half in Latin, half in the rough tongue of the village. And still the pyre stood unlit, the moment stretched, suspended between silence and flame. The crowd trembled not because they doubted the verdict, but because they feared the act itself. For what if the egg cracked before the fire consumed it? What if something hack? At last, the torch was lifted. Its flame licked the dry air, its smoke curling like a serpent. The torchbearer hesitated, then thrust it into the pyre. Fire caught. First a whisper, then a roar. Flames coiled upward, orange tongues devouring straw and wood, heat surging against faces, forcing the crowd to step back. The rooster cried out, its voice piercing above the roar, echoing against stone walls. The egg, small and pale, began to glow as heat embraced it, its shell darkening, cracking, hissing. The CR? In that moment, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. Was it only the shell breaking? Or was something inside struggling, clawing, pressing against its prison? Did they not hear a hiss, faint yet unmistakable, rising with the smoke? Some swore they did. Others swore they saw shapes writhe within the flame. Fear multiplied itself, each mind adding visions to the inferno, until it seemed certain that hell itself was cracking open in the square. But fire consumed all. The shell blackened, collapsed in. When at last the flames died down, only ash remained. No serpent crawled forth, no Antichrist emerged. Yet the silence was not relief. It was dread, for absence itself can be haunting. If nothing emerged, perhaps it was because the fire had succeeded. Or perhaps it was because the creature had escaped in smoke, invisible, diffused into the very air they breathed. No one said it aloud, but all felt it. The rooster's death and the egg's destruction closed the breach, but had they sealed it, or simply released? Priests declared the ritual of victory. The devil had been thwarted, the order restored. They blessed the crowd, sprinkled holy water upon the ashes, and proclaimed the village cleansed. Yet behind their words lay unease. For the questions had not burned away. They lingered, faint as smoke clinging to garments, refusing to vanish. Had this truly been the end, or merely an interlude in a war that never ceased? The crowd dispersed slowly, as though reluctant to leave the site. Mothers tugged children home. But deep inside, no one was convinced the danger was gone. Fear is not so easily extinguished. It smolders, like embers beneath ash, waiting for the smallest wind to flare again. The rooster was gone, the egg destroyed, yet their images remained, etched into memory, magnified by imagination. For if a rooster could lay an egg once, could it not happen again? And if the devil could mock creation once, could he not return with subtler tricks? darker inversions, more dreadful signs? The villagers had seen thee. And so the fire, though meant to cleanse, became seed itself. Seed of further fear, seed of stories that would travel beyond the village, whispered by merchants, written in chronicles, expanded in sermons. The rooster's trial and execution became not only memory, but myth. And myths have lives longer than any bird, stronger than any shell. They live in the marrow of belief, in the smoke of fear, in the echo of fire. The egg was ash, the rooster charred bone, but their meaning spread. In taverns, the store, and in that spreading, something deeper was revealed. The human need to clothe mystery in ritual, to bind terror in fire, to burn the questions we cannot answer. For the rooster's egg was never only about prophecy. It was about us, about our refusal to let contradiction stand, our need to crush what unsettles us, our fear that the abyss is closer than we dare admit. Fire, we tell ourselves, will keep it at bay. But the truth is, fire only hides it in smoke. The abyss waits still, silent, patient, ready to. Segment 6 closes with flame, with ash, with silence. The rooster is gone, the egg is gone, yet the fear remains. And fear, once born, cannot be burned away. It only changes shape, waiting for the next anomaly, the next omen, the next egg in straw. And when it comes, humanity will again reach for fire, not to understand, but to destroy. Always fire. Always the hope that destruction can silence mystery. Always the illusion that ash is enough. Fear does not die in fire. It lingers in smoke, drifts on breath, and slips into words. Long after the flames that consumed the rooster and its impossible egg faded into ash, the story was alive. It walked with travelers, it sat in taverns, it whispered in sermons, it flowed from ink across parchment. The execution had not silenced the terror, it had multiplied it. For when people left that square, they carried more than memory. They carried myth. And myth has a way of seeding itself in every shadow it touches. The tale grew as it moved. One villager said he had seen the egg shudder before the fire consumed it, as though something inside clawed to be born. Another swore a shadow, winged and terrible, had risen with the smoke and vanished into the sky. Some claimed the rooster's final crow was not of pain, but of prophecy, a sound that echoed still at dawn. Each retelling added another thread, weaving terror tighter, until truth dissolved entirely. It no longer mattered what had really happened. What mattered was, Europe was fertile ground for such a legend. These were centuries when the sky itself was red as scripture. A red moon was not astronomy, it was an omen. A comet was not stone and ice, it was the sword of God raised in warning. A stillborn child, a two-headed calf, a rain of frogs. These were not curiosities, they were sermons written into the fabric of the world. To medieval eyes, nature was not mute but eloquent, always speaking, always hinting. The rooster's egg fit perfectly into this chorus of signs. Priests seized the story, carrying it into pulpits. Their sermons thundered, "Be vigilant, lest you too be deceived. For if a rooster can betray its nature, so too can man, so too can kings, so too can the very church if it is not guarded." The rooster became a parable, its egg a warning. Faithful crowds trembled at the words, not because they had seen the egg, but because fear thrives on imagination. What is invisible is always more frightening than what is before the eyes. The absurdity of the trial was. Monks chronicled the tale in ink, their quills scratching across vellum. In margins of psalters and chronicles, they sketched grotesque beasts, cockatrices with feathered crowns, basilisks with burning eyes. They linked the rooster's egg to eclipses, to earthquakes, to plagues. Soon it was impossible to tell where history ended and legend began. Was it one rooster or many? One egg or a dozen? Was it destroyed by fire, or did it hatch and release a serpent that fled into the night? Memory distorted, growing. Superstition spread in silence, yet it shaped everything. A traveler might pause at dawn and listen uneasily to a rooster's crow, recalling the story. A farmer might whisper a prayer over his hens, fearing that one might betray him with an egg it should never lay. Mothers hushed children with warnings. Do not touch strange eggs, for they may hatch shadows. Even those who scoffed repeated the tale, for even in doubt, fear found a way to live. For fear is faithful. It never needs truth. It only needs a VE. And so the rooster's egg was no longer a thing of straw and shell. It became an emblem of inversion, a sign that the world could break its rules at any moment. If a rooster could betray its nature, what else might? If the smallest crack in the order of things could release apocalypse, then every boundary was fragile, every category uncertain. Men saw in the egg not only the devil's mockery, but their own trembling reflection. That creation itself was never as secure as they wished it to be. That one day, the church knew the power of such tales, and it wielded them like instruments. For fear makes obedience easy. Fear drives men to cling to ritual, to kneel more fervently, to obey more quickly. The rooster's egg became a story not merely of dread, but of control. In every retelling, the message sharpened. Trust the church, for only the church can shield you from such terrors. Without its guidance, the Antichrist might hatch not from eggs, but from your very lives. Fear fed obedience, and obedience fed power. Soon, the rooster's trial was not alone in memory. Across Europe, animals continued to be tried. A pig that killed a child was hanged in public. A goat accused of blasphemy was beaten. Insects were excommunicated, cursed by priests who read solemn rites over fields of locusts. To us, it may seem madness, but to them, it was ritual, an attempt to bind chaos within ceremony, to remind all who watched that nothing, not even beasts, stood outside the reach of law and faith. Each trial echoed the rooster's EAC, and yet, beneath all the fear, there flickered something else: awe. For though the story was terrifying, though it was weaponized into obedience, there was a part of the human heart that could not help but marvel. The rooster's egg was proof that the world was stranger than they dared imagine. It was a glimpse into mystery, into the hidden folds of creation, into the edges of reality. Even as priests thundered against it, even as villagers feared it, they carried with them a secret wonder, perhaps the war. Superstition, then, was never only fear. It was fear given shape, fear turned into ritual, fear woven into story. It was the attempt to tame chaos by naming it, even if the name was monstrous. And the rooster's egg, absurd and impossible, became one of the most enduring of these names. It lived not only in ash, but in imagination, not only in sermons, but in silence. And once born, such a superstition does not die. It lingers, reshaping itself, attaching to new signs, new omens, new fears. Memory is never faithful. It does not preserve, it reshapes. It does not store, it invents. What begins as a single moment, an egg cradled in straw, a rooster condemned before judges, becomes 1,000 variations as it passes from tongue to tongue, generation to generation. The trial that burned itself into the eyes of one village did not stay there. It traveled farther than smoke, wider than rumor. It crossed rivers and borders. It took root in chronicles, ballads, and whispers. The rooster was dead. In one version, the rooster never laid the egg at all. A witch, they said, had crept into the barn, hiding the cursed shell beneath the bird's feathers, laughing as she forced nature to mock itself. In another, the egg did not shatter in the fire, but hatched before the crowd, releasing a serpent crowned with feathers, its wings tearing the smoke as it fled into the woods. Some swore the rooster was not simply executed, but paraded in mockery, dressed in rags as king of inversion, crowned and jeered before. Memory bends toward the needs of those who tell it. In France, the story was bound to the fires of witch trials. There the rooster's egg became evidence, proof that women danced with the devil beneath moonlight, warping beasts to betray their kind. In Germany, the legend latched onto the basilisk, the serpent king with eyes of death, whose hatching always traced back to a rooster's impossible egg. In Switzerland, chronicles tell of 3 eggs laid, each believed to carry a cockatrice, each destroyed by. And so, across Europe, the rooster's egg became less about one bird and more about fear itself. It was the symbol of inversion, the sign of betrayal in creation, the reminder that the world could crack from within. Memory dissolved detail and preserved only essence, that boundaries are fragile, and when they collapse, terror takes form. Folklore thickened around the tale like ivy around a ruin. They said that if a rooster crowed at midnight, it was not dawn it summoned but doom. They said feathers burned red under the moon, forever scorched by the fire that had consumed the egg. They whispered that the ashes were scattered into fields, and the wheat that grew there bore the taste of smoke, as though the land itself remembered. Some swore that the rooster's bones were preserved, never decaying, relics of an unholy martyrdom. A few believe songs carried the rooster into other worlds. In ballads sung by wandering minstrels, it became a trickster laying eggs of gold that cursed kings into madness. In fireside tales told to children, it lurked in forests, half bird, half beast, ready to crawl from shadows if they strayed too far. In ruins, peasants claimed they heard its crow echo from broken towers, a herald not of dawn but of ruin. It became everything and nothing. That is the nature of folklore. Once born, a story seeps into every crack. Yet memory, even as it distorts, preserves something essential. Beneath all exaggeration lay a seed of truth. The human mind cannot endure contradiction. A rooster's egg was too heavy for imagination to leave behind. The trial and fire were rituals not only against beast and shell, but against doubt itself. Every retelling, however warped, returned to the same core. That order is fragile, and when order collapses, fear is born. Historians centuries later found shards of the tale scattered across Europe like fragments of broken glass. A sermon in France warned of birds that betray creation. German manuscripts spoke of glowing eggs stolen by thieves who died before dawn. An English ballad sang of a rooster that crowed thrice, laid a silver egg, and doomed a kingdom within the year. In Spain, peasants claimed such eggs foretold famine, their shells glowing faintly before harvest failed. In Poland and Hungary, whispers told of eggs. Generations passed, but the rooster never left memory. When plague struck, some swore it was the curse of the rooster's ashes carried on the wind. When famine ravaged, others claimed the land still remembered the fire that destroyed the egg. When comets tore across the heavens, villagers said they were fragments of the cursed shell falling from the sky. The event that began in straw had become a cosmology of dread, proof that the world itself bore scars. Memory bled into prophecy, and prophecy into fear. And yet, alongside terror, there was laughter. For absurdity always shadows fear. Men in taverns mocked the tale, boasting that only fools believed in a rooster's egg. They drank and jested, yet they never forgot the details. Laughter gave distance, but not release. Behind every grin lurked the same question, what if it were true? And so the tale survived, not through belief alone, but through repetition. Memory thrives not on certainty, but on retelling. Whether mocked or feared, the rooster lived on in. Other trials joined its shadow. A pig tried for murder, a goat accused of blasphemy, insects excommunicated from fields. Each echoed the rooster's fate, proof that chaos could be bound in ritual, that even beasts could be brought before law. And so the rooster's memory was fed by these echoes, each absurd trial amplifying its legend, until the rooster was no longer one bird but all anomalies, all contradictions, all the things too strange to endure. And so segment 8 closes not with feathers or flames, but with shadows of memory. The rooster is no longer bird, no longer trial, no longer ash. It is myth. Its egg, long destroyed, gleams still in imagination as though unbroken. Its crow echoes not in barns but in minds, whenever order feels fragile, whenever boundaries tremble, whenever the abyss presses close. What humanity remembers is never the fact. It is the fear the fact contained. And fear, once born, is immortal. Memory is never faithful. It does not preserve, it reshapes. It does not store, it invents. What begins as a single moment, an egg cradled in straw, a rooster condemned before judges, becomes 1,000 variations as it passes from tongue to tongue, generation to generation. The trial that burned itself into the eyes of one village did not stay there. It traveled farther than smoke, wider than rumor. It crossed rivers and borders. It took root in chronicles, ballads, and whispers. The rooster was dead. In one version, the rooster never laid the egg at all. A witch, they said, had crept into the barn, hiding the cursed shell beneath the bird's feathers, laughing as she forced nature to mock itself. In another, the egg did not shatter in the fire but hatched before the crowd, releasing a serpent crowned with feathers, its wings tearing the smoke as it fled into the woods. Some swore the rooster was not simply executed but paraded in mockery, dressed in rags as king of inversion, crowned and jeered before. Memory bends toward the needs of those who tell it. In France, the story was bound to the fires of witch trials. There the rooster's egg became evidence, proof that women danced with the devil beneath moonlight, warping beasts to betray their kind. In Germany, the legend latched onto the basilisk, the serpent king with eyes of death, whose hatching always traced back to a rooster's impossible egg. In Switzerland, chronicles tell of 3 eggs laid, each believed to carry a cockatrice, each destroyed by. And so, across Europe, the rooster's egg became less about one bird and more about fear itself. It was the symbol of inversion, the sign of betrayal in creation, the reminder that the world could crack from within. Memory dissolved detail and preserved only essence. That boundaries are fragile, and when they collapse, terror takes form. Folklore thickened around the tale like ivy around a ruin. They said that if a rooster crowed at midnight, it was not dawn it summoned but doom. They said feathers burned red under the moon, forever scorched by the fire that had consumed the egg. They whispered that the ashes were scattered into fields, and the wheat that grew there bore the taste of smoke, as though the land itself remembered. Some swore that the rooster's bones were preserved, never decaying, relics of an unholy martyrdom. A few believe songs carried the rooster into other worlds. In ballads sung by wandering minstrels, it became a trickster laying eggs of gold that cursed kings into madness. In fireside tales told to children, it lurked in forests, half bird, half beast, ready to crawl from shadows if they strayed too far. In ruins, peasants claimed they heard its crow echo from broken towers, a herald not of dawn but of ruin. It became everything and nothing. That is the nature of folklore. Once born, a story seeps into every crack. Yet memory, even as it distorts, preserves something essential. Beneath all exaggeration lay a seed of truth. The human mind cannot endure contradiction. A rooster's egg was too heavy for imagination to leave behind. The trial and fire were rituals not only against beast and shell, but against doubt itself. Every retelling, however warped, returned to the same core. That order is fragile, and when order collapses, fear is born. Historians centuries later found shards of the tale scattered across Europe like fragments of broken glass. A sermon in France warned of birds that betray creation. German manuscripts spoke of glowing eggs stolen by thieves who died before dawn. An English ballad sang of a rooster that crowed thrice, laid a silver egg, and doomed a kingdom within the year. In Spain, peasants claimed such eggs foretold famine, their shells glowing faintly before harvest failed. In Poland and Hungary, whispers told of eggs. Generations passed, but the rooster never left memory. When plague struck, some swore it was the curse of the rooster's ashes carried on the wind. When famine ravaged, others claimed the land still remembered the fire that destroyed the egg. When comets tore across the heavens, villagers said they were fragments of the cursed shell falling from the sky. The event that began in straw had become a cosmology of dread, proof that the world itself bore scars. Memory bled into prophecy, and prophecy into fear. And yet, alongside terror, there was laughter. For absurdity always shadows fear. Men in taverns mocked the tale, boasting that only fools believed in a rooster's egg. They drank and jested, yet they never forgot the details. Laughter gave distance, but not release. Behind every grin lurked the same question, what if it were true? And so the tale survived, not through belief alone, but through repetition. Memory thrives not on certainty, but on retelling. Whether mocked or feared, the rooster lived on in. Other trials joined its shadow. A pig tried for murder, a goat accused of blasphemy, insects excommunicated from fields. Each echoed the rooster's fate, proof that chaos could be bound in ritual, that even beasts could be brought before law. And so the rooster's memory was fed by these echoes, each absurd trial amplifying its legend, until the rooster was no longer one bird but all anomalies, all contradictions, all the things too strange to endure. And so segment 8 closes not with feathers or flames, but with shadows of memory. The rooster is no longer bird, no longer trial, no longer ash. It is myth. Its egg, long destroyed, gleams still in imagination as though unbroken. Its crow echoes not in barns but in minds. Whenever order feels fragile, whenever boundaries tremble, whenever the abyss presses close. What humanity remembers is never the fact. It is the fear the fact contained. And fear, once born, is immortal. Every story ends, but no story truly dies. Ashes scatter, feathers fade, chronicles crumble into dust, yet the memory of the rooster lingers. It lingers not because it was rational, not because it was probable, but because it was unforgettable. A bird condemned for laying an egg feared as cradle of the Antichrist, a fire lit not to destroy flesh, but to silence dread. What imagination could ever release such an image once it had taken root? This, then, is how history survives, not in the cold cat. The rooster's trial was never only about a rooster. It was about boundaries, about the fragility of order. It asked whether creation itself could betray us, whether the world might suddenly mock its own rules. And it was about power, the power of church and court to stand above nature, to claim dominion not just over men but over beasts, not just over bodies but over imagination. If even a rooster could be brought to trial, then what could not? And if even an egg could be feared, then what could be trusted? But as we look back, centuries removed, what strikes us most is not the judgment itself, but the silence around it. The peasants who left that square carried the story home, whispered it over firesides, muttered it in taverns, etched it into the margins of memory. Some believed with trembling awe. Some laughed in secret. Some carried both awe and laughter in the same breath. And that duality, perhaps, is the most human thing of all, that we can hold terror and ridicule side by side, that we can fear what? The rooster's egg became more than a legend. It became a mirror. In it, we see reflected the strange truth that humans fear not only beasts and omens, but the collapse of certainty itself. We crave borders, between dawn and dusk, between good and evil, between man and beast. The rooster's crime was to blur those borders, to exist as a crack in the wall of order. And when the crack appears, authority rushes to seal it, to burn it, to bury it in ash. But cracks never vanish. They spread. They echo. There, across centuries, echoes multiplied. Chroniclers retold it, poets reshaped it, peasants reimagined it. Folklore carried the rooster farther than the fire ever could. Each generation found in it what it feared most. For some, it was witches nesting eggs of doom. For others, it was serpents coiled in straw. For still others, it was laughter at the sheer absurdity of it all. The story shifted as sand shifts beneath tides, yet something remained constant. The sense that the world is not as stable as we believe. And here, at the end, the rooster's crow is not only a sound of dawn, but a reminder of fragility. What is dawn, after all, but a daily miracle that the sun will return? What is faith but the belief that order will hold? The rooster that laid an egg shattered that faith, if only for a moment. And in that shattering, humanity revealed itself, desperate to restore order, yet unable to erase the memory of chaos. That is why the trial was staged, why the fire was lit, why the tale endured. Not to destroy thee. The rooster teaches us this. Fear is both poison and glue. It poisons reason, warping judgment into absurdity. Yet it also binds communities, giving them rituals to enact, stories to retell, enemies to condemn. Fear unites as much as it divides. And in the middle of that paradox stands the rooster, innocent, absurd, immortal. But there is another lesson, subtler and sharper. Power does not need reason to endure. It needs performance. It needs memory. It needs imagination shaped into obedience. The trial of the rooster was absurd, but in its absurdity lay genius. To demand belief in the unbelievable is to demand submission without question. To make men kneel before nonsense is to make them kneel before anything. And so the rooster's fire burned not only an egg, but the boundaries of doubt. And yet, absurdity has its own shadow, laughter. Centuries later, the tale provokes not obedience, but smirks. The power that once staged it has crumbled, but the memory remains. And in memory, power is mocked. The rooster, once condemned, becomes a jester in the court of history, crowing at midnight, crowing not to herald dawn, but to remind us how strange we have always been. Perhaps this is why the story survives, because it makes us tremble and smile at once. What, then, is the true Antichrist in this tale? Was it the egg, the rooster, the serpent imagined within? Or was it the fear that drove men to bind beasts in law? Perhaps the Antichrist was never in the straw at all. Perhaps it was in the hearts of men, in their hunger to control what cannot be controlled, in their terror of chaos, in their willingness to condemn the innocent to preserve illusion. If so, then the rooster was never guilty. It was witness. Witness to the fragility of order, witness to TH. And so the documentary ends where it began, with an egg in straw, fragile, ordinary, yet capable of overturning worlds. The rooster that laid it has long since turned to dust, but its echo remains, carried in ink, in song, in memory, and now in us. We have followed its story through trial and fire, through folklore and fear, through laughter and power. And as the final words fade, what remains is a question, as haunting as the crow at dawn. What fragile egg lies hidden in our own world, waiting to crack teach? Perhaps it is technology, shimmering with promises yet threaded with dread. Perhaps it is politics, fragile shells cradling storms. Perhaps it is the earth itself, groaning beneath our weight, threatening to break. We, too, fear the impossible. We, too, stage rituals to silence doubt. And we, too, may find ourselves condemning roosters when what we fear most is not the bird, not the egg, but ourselves. So listen, not only with ears, but with imagination. Hear the rooster crow, not as herald of dawn, but as echo of memory. It crows to remind us that no order is eternal, that every law trembles, that every certainty hides a crack. It crows to remind us that absurdity is not weakness, but truth, that the world is stranger than reason, and we are stranger still. The rooster is dead, the egg is ash, yet the story lives, and in the story, we see ourselves.